the British cigarette lighter that destroyed more tanks than an entire bomber squadron. June 6, 1944. Normandy, France, 0730 hours. Private William Smith of the 2nd Battalion, Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire. Light infantry crouches behind the shattered stone wall of a Norman farmhouse, his hands gripping a peculiar contraption that weighs 32 pounds and looks more like an oversized drain pipe than a weapon of war. 200 meters ahead, a German Panzer IV rolls forward through the morning haze, its 75mm gun traversing toward British positions. Smith braces the shoulder pad against his collarbone, pulls the cocking mechanism with both hands until it clicks with brutal finality, and aims. The projector infantry, anti-tank, known universally and derisively as the Piat, releases its spring-loaded spigot with a metallic clang that sounds less like warfare and more like a factory accident. The 2.5-pound hollow charge bomb arcs through the air at just 300 feet per second, slower than most rifles, and strikes the Panzer's side armor. The shaped charge detonates with a concentrated fury that tears through 80 millimeters of steel plate, igniting ammunition stores inside. Within seconds, the 30-ton vehicle becomes a crematorium for its crew. Smith reloads, his shoulder already bruising from the weapon's vicious recoil. This is the Piat, the weapon British soldiers mockingly called the cigarette lighter, because, like a cheap lighter, it rarely worked when you needed it most. Yet when it did, it delivered fire. The Piat entered service in August 1943, born from desperation and British ingenuity in equal measure. By 1942, the British Army faced a catastrophic deficit in anti-tank capabilities. The Boys anti-tank rifle, a .55 caliber bolt-action monster, had proven utterly inadequate against newer German armor. Its 13mm penetration might disable a light reconnaissance vehicle, but against the frontal armor of a Panzer IV or Tiger Fern, it was no more effective than throwing stones. The American M1 bazooka, a rocket-propelled solution, impressed British observers during trials in 1942, but Britain possessed neither the industrial capacity nor the raw materials to produce rocket motors in sufficient quantities. Cordite, aluminum tubes, electrical firing systems, all were in short supply. What Britain did have was Major Millis Jeffress, an explosives expert and engineer attached to Winston Churchill's Special Weapons Division, known formally as MD-1. Jeffress had been experimenting with spigot mortars since 1940, weapons that launch projectiles from a central rod rather than from inside a tube. The principle was simple, medieval even. A powerful spring or explosive charge would propel a hollow bomb forward along a fixed rod, the energy concentrated into a single violent thrust. Jeffress refined this concept into something infantry could carry. The Piat used a massive coiled spring compressed with approximately 200 pounds of force to drive a steel rod, the spigot, into the tail of a hollow charge bomb. Upon firing, the spring released, the spigot struck the bomb's percussion cap, and the bomb rocketed forward while simultaneously recocking the spring for the next shot. In theory, this made the Piat self-cocking. In practice, soldiers quickly discovered that the weapon only recocked itself if the bomb successfully left the launcher. Misfires or cold weather could result in a soldier needing to manually recock the weapon by placing both feet on the shoulder pad and hauling back the cocking mechanism with both hands, a process requiring significant strength and leaving the operator utterly exposed. Despite these flaws, the Piat possessed one undeniable advantage. Its 2.5-pound hollow charge warhead could penetrate 100 millimeters of armor plate at any angle, more than enough to destroy any German tank from the side or rear, and sufficient to threaten even the Tiger Wern's frontal armor at close range. Production began in early 1943 at the ICI Nobel factory in Ardere, Scotland, and at smaller facilities across Britain. By D-Day in June 1944, British and Commonwealth forces had received approximately 115,000 PIATs. Each infantry platoon received one PIAT as standard issue, operated by a two-man team, one to fire, one to load. The weapon measured 3 feet 9 inches in length, weighed 32 pounds unloaded, and could theoretically engage targets up to 100 meters away. Though effective range rarely exceeded 50 meters due to the bomb's slow velocity and pronounced arc. Soldiers learned quickly that the Piat was not a weapon for long-range dueling with tanks. It was an ambush weapon, a last-ditch tool for desperate men in close quarters. Training emphasized patience, positioning, and nerve. Fire too early, and the tank would spot you and respond with overwhelming firepower. Fire too late, and you risk the tank crushing your position beneath its tracks. The weapon's reputation among British troops was decidedly mixed. Soldiers complained bitterly about the cocking mechanism, which required Herculean effort and often resulted in broken fingers or injured backs when done improperly. The vicious recoil, which could generate up to 300 pounds of force against the operator's shoulder, left men bruised and battered after repeated firings. The weapon was sensitive to weather. Cold temperatures stiffened the spring, reducing range and reliability, while mud or dirt could jam the spigot mechanism entirely. Yet despite these complaints, the Piat accumulated a combat record that astonished even its critics. At the Battle of the Admin Box in Burma, February 1944, Indian and British forces used Piats to destroy multiple Japanese Type 95 Hago light tanks during close-quarters fighting in dense jungle terrain where anti-tank guns could not be positioned. In Italy, during the Gothic line fighting of autumn 1944, Canadian infantry armed with Piats ambushed German armor in the narrow mountain passes of the Apennines, destroying Panthers and Panzerfuhres that had survived Allied artillery bombardments. The weapon achieved legendary status during Operation Market Garden in September 1944. At Arnhem Bridge, a small force of British paratroopers from the 1st Airborne Division held the northern approach against repeated German counterattacks. Lance Sergeant John Baskyfield of the 2nd Battalion, South Staffordshire Regiment, operated a 6-pounder anti-tank gun until German fire destroyed it, killing his crew. Baskyfield then seized a Piat and single-handedly engaged a German self-propelled gun at point-blank range, destroying it before being killed by machine gun fire. He was posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross. Nearby, Corporal Arthur Henley used a Piat to destroy a German armored car that had been pinning down British positions, allowing wounded men to be evacuated. These were not isolated incidents. Throughout the 9-day battle at Arnhem, British paratroopers destroyed at least 23 German armored vehicles using Piats, often at ranges of 30 meters or less, firing from upper-story windows, from behind rubble piles, from basement cellars where desperate men made their final stands. The tactical doctrine surrounding Piat employment evolved rapidly during 1944 and 1945. Infantry commanders learned to position Piat teams in urban environments where the weapon's short range became an advantage rather than a limitation. In Normandy's Bocage country, where high hedgerows channeled German armor into predictable routes, British infantry would establish Piat ambush positions at corners and intersections, waiting until tanks committed to narrow lanes before engaging from 10 meters away. The side armor of a Panzer IV, typically 40 millimeters thick, offered no protection against the Piat's hollow charge. Even the Tiger I, with its impervious frontal armor, could be destroyed if struck in the tracks, engine deck, or rear plate. Combat reports from Northwest Europe indicate that Piats achieved approximately a 40% first-round hit rate against stationary targets at 50 meters and roughly 60% against moving targets at 30 meters or less. Once a tank was immobilized by track damage, subsequent shots could be aimed at vulnerable points with devastating effect. The weapon saw extensive service beyond Europe. In Burma, British and Indian forces used Piats against Japanese bunkers and fortified positions, where the hollow charge warhead proved unexpectedly effective against reinforced concrete and log emplacements. The weapon's simple construction made it ideal for jungle warfare, as it required no batteries, no complex optics, and could function even when clogged with mud after being cleaned. Australian forces employed Piats during the New Guinea campaign and later during operations in Borneo, where Japanese light tanks and armored vehicles fell victim to ambushes in dense tropical terrain. Canadian forces fighting in the Scheldt estuary in October and November 1944 used Piats extensively during urban combat in the flooded polderlands of the Netherlands, where the weapon's ability to fire from cramped positions inside buildings proved invaluable. Statistically, the Piat destroyed more German armored vehicles per unit issued than any other British infantry anti-tank weapon of the war. Precise kill counts remain difficult to verify, as battlefield records often attributed tank kills to anti-tank weapons, without specifying whether the weapon was a Piat, a bazooka, or a towed gun. However, analysis of after-action reports from British 21st Army Group during the Northwest Europe campaign suggests Piats accounted for approximately 12 to 15% of all German tank losses from D-Day to VE Day, a figure exceeding 300 confirmed kills. This compares favorably to entire squadrons of tank-hunting aircraft, which expended thousands of rockets and bombs to achieve similar results. A Hawker Typhoon fighter bomber, the RAF's premier tank killer, typically fired 8 RP-3 rockets per sortie. Studies conducted after the war revealed that these rockets achieved approximately a 4% hit rate against armored vehicles, meaning a squadron of 12 Typhoons might destroy 2 or 3 tanks per mission at the cost of fuel, ammunition, and the constant risk of anti-aircraft fire. A single Piat team, costing perhaps 20 pounds in materials and requiring only courage and patience, could destroy multiple tanks in a single engagement. The weapon's success forced German tactical responses. By late 1944, German commanders issued specific instructions regarding British Piat tactics, warning tank crews to avoid urban areas, to never advance without infantry support, and to maintain constant vigilance against ambushes at close range. German after-action reports from Normandy repeatedly mentioned the Britischer Panzerabwehrwerfer, the British anti-tank projector, and credited it with destroying numerous vehicles. Some German units adopted the practice of welding additional armor plates to tank sides and rears, adding weight and reducing mobility in an attempt to defeat hollow charge weapons. These improvisations proved largely ineffective, as the Piat's warhead could defeat up to 100 millimeters of armor regardless of additional plating. British military authorities, initially skeptical of the weapon's value, gradually recognized its effectiveness. In early 1945, production accelerated, with an additional 45,000 units manufactured before VE Day in May. Plans existed to equip British forces for the invasion of Japan with upgraded Piats featuring improved springs and lighter cocking mechanisms, though the Japanese surrender in August 1945 rendered these modifications unnecessary. The weapon remained in British service until 1950, when it was finally replaced by the Energa anti-tank rifle grenade, and later by various recoilless rifle designs that offered similar firepower without the Piat's notorious recoil and cocking difficulties. After the war, thousands of Piats were distributed to British-aligned nations and former colonies. Greek forces used Piats during the Greek Civil War from 1946 to 1949, both government troops and communist insurgents employing the weapon against armored vehicles and fortified positions. Israeli forces utilized captured British Piats during the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, where they proved effective against Egyptian and Jordanian armor. In Korea, British and Commonwealth forces brought Piats to the peninsula in 1950, though by then the weapon was increasingly obsolescent compared to American bazookas and recoilless rifles. The last confirmed combat use of a Piat occurred during the Malayan Emergency in the early 1950s, where British security forces occasionally employed them against insurgent positions in dense jungle terrain. The Piat's legacy extends beyond its combat record. It represented a uniquely British approach to weapon design, pragmatic, unconventional, and engineered to work within severe material and industrial constraints. While American forces enjoyed the luxury of producing hundreds of thousands of bazookas with their sophisticated rocket motors and electrical ignition systems, and while Soviet forces fielded millions of RPG-type weapons, Britain created a spring-powered medieval catapult that somehow destroyed modern tanks. The weapon embodied the improvisation and determination that characterized British military innovation during the Second World War. That same spirit that produced the bouncing bomb, the Mulberry Harbors, and the Hobart's Funnies. It was crude, uncomfortable, and often frustrating. But in the hands of courageous men at close range, it was absolutely lethal. Today, Piats reside in military museums across Britain and the Commonwealth, silent reminders of a weapon that soldiers loved to hate, but depended upon to survive. Collectors prize them for their unusual mechanism and historical significance. A few remain in firing condition, occasionally demonstrated at military historical events with inert training rounds. Veterans who carried the Piat speak of it with grudging respect, acknowledging its flaws while remembering the German tanks it destroyed, the comrades it saved, the battles it helped win. In the calculus of war, where effectiveness is measured in lives preserved and objectives achieved, the cigarette lighter that so rarely worked when you first pulled the trigger nevertheless delivered enough fire to burn through steel, through terror, through the seemingly invincible armor of the Third Reich's panzer divisions, one desperate shot at a time.